Venezuela, a place most of you have heard of, but in truth, most know nothing of. I mean, most people that are aware that my country even exists know only one of the several interpretations of what is going on exactly right now over there. And I mean several, because each political camp has a different interpretation and a different story about what is going on over there and why it's happening. And that is all good. I mean, freedom of expression, y'all. I'm all for it. What I find a little bit sad, though, is that most of those people have never set a foot on my country, ever. Probably not even anywhere in South America either. And since we're also living in a time of questioning the old authority figures, I've always thought that it might be productive for someone who was born and raised in Venezuela and has a strong and vivid and somewhat corny passion for the history of my country to try to tell it to you in a way so you can understand what is Venezuela. And since we're doing this only one time, I better tell you the whole thing. Well, not the whole thing. The thousands of years of history before the contact with the Europeans will not be explained over here because honestly I haven't studied them yet. But it's something that I would like to review one day as well. But back to the point. Let me, if I may, tell you the story of a place nicknamed the Land of Grace. A place that served as the gateway for the colonization of a whole continent. Let me tell you the story of Venezuela, the history of oil and love. The history of Venezuela begins, as with many other Latin American countries, in Spain, with the already back then infamous Christopher Columbus, who left the port of Sanlúcar de Barrameda in 1499 and decided to take a more southerly route off the coast of Africa. After a couple of really hard months in the middle of the ocean, somebody finally spotted land, 3 hills in the horizon that gave that place its current name, the island of Trinidad. Entering the Gulf of Paria from the south, Columbus actually noticed the strong discharge of the Orinoco River into the Atlantic. A current so intense that is strong enough to displace basically all of the salty water of the ocean very far into the open sea with no visible land. It was so intense, in fact, that he thought for a moment that he was navigating uphill. You see, Columbus probably participated in the belief that the world was not really round, but it was more pear-shaped. That was based on the Christian mythology of the day. If you read Dante's Divine Comedy, you will actually get a glimpse of that worldview, with a hollow earth and a huge mountain protruding from its side, with the Garden of Eden on its top, and 4 rivers streaming down from that hill. Those were the Euphrates, the Tigris, the Gihon, and the Pichon. Now, 2 of those I'm sure you know very well. But the other 2 have been geographically located everywhere on the planet by different ancient people. So it wouldn't be that surprising if Columbus, who was a deeply fervent Catholic man, would think that he was actually at the place where the Gihon or the Pichon River would meet the ocean. Not only that, but the very visible wealth of trees, animals, plants, fish, birds, everywhere in a seemingly pleasant and peaceful climate maybe made him double down on the idea that he was actually seeing the Garden of Eden. But maybe not to ruffle everyone's feathers at the time, he opted to call it only the Land of Grace. I mean, these were the times of the Spanish Inquisition, after all. And very soon enough, a large number of explorers came to see for themselves this so-called earthly paradise. And even though nobody went to the poetic extreme that he did, they were thoroughly convinced of the wealth and richness of resources, and the openness of locals actually left a taste for these exotic lands. Of course, neither them nor the locals were aware of the extraordinarily amount of life that will be lost because of this tiny encounter. First, because of illness, plagues, and germs, and second, because of the extermination and enslavement of the native population. But back to the story. The land will get its current name, Venezuela, very, very quickly. Actually, the first instance of the name is on the world map by Juan de la Cosa in 1501, a map that he made and created based on his observations and notations a couple of years before when he was on that coast, together with another very infamous historical figure, Amerigo Vespucci, who's credited with both the naming of Venezuela and, of course, the whole continent. But I made a whole separate video about that, in Spanish though, so just put the subtitles on. What is most important to remark about these expeditions, though, is the incredibly large amount of pearls that were given to the Spanish explorers as gifts by the local, and that they took back to Spain as proof of the wealth of the coast. In fact, it is said that Columbus was given half a kilo of pearls at the island of Paraguachoa, which is what we call Margarita today. The frenzy that these easily obtained pearls caused in Spain was so much that actually the first settlement in the whole of South America happened here, on the island of Cuagua, which is today called Cubagua. And I'm talking about the town of Nueva Cadiz. At first it was nothing but a seasonal post to trade with the locals these pearls that they will dive to get. Soon enough it will get a harbor and a few roads. The central square will get paved with rocks, and over 300 people live in this tiny island that had absolutely no sources of fresh water, and that was created basically only for pearls. The water was sourced either at the Paraguachoa Island, which was a way larger island, or directly from the coast, depending on the hostility of the local tribes at the time. In fact, hostilities actually got to a breaking point around 1515, when the town was basically razed by the Waikiki people. And here's where we should take a little bit of a tangent. You see, the Spanish crown did not justify the colonization of the new continent by any economic reason. The justification for it was mostly religious. This is actually the origin of the term the good savage, el buen salvaje, which refers to basically all of the indigenous people of the Americas, but especially the people around the Caribbean basin. I mean, in the eyes of the Spaniards, only savages would wear so little clothing and be so unaware of the real value of gold and pearls. And based on that, in 1513, the Spanish crown gave its third royal decree to evangelize and convert the population from Cariaco to Coquibacoa, basically the whole Venezuelan coast, to the Dominican and Franciscan monks, who came to the coast with some other explorers and military figures to try to settle and convert the native population to Christianism. In 1515, the first one of these missions was established formally on the Venezuelan coast, at the mouth of the Manzanares River. It was called Nueva Toledo. Now, Nueva Toledo was actually a mixed bag of success. By 1520, the place was sacked and razed by the Cumanagoto people around it, because to them it was very, very clear what they were there to do. This whole conversion into Christianism thing was nothing but an way to get slaves. But the Spaniards did not quit. I mean, this was a very strategically important place to hold. So they refounded Nueva Toledo, and they sent actually one of the most important peoples of the time to try to govern and get some peace around it. Bartolomé de las Casas, who was a Dominican friar, I think, Dominican or Franciscan, I think Dominican, who gave us in 1521 actually the first account of what was life like around Nueva Toledo. And well, the description is not pretty. In fact, it could be argued in a way that the horrors that Bartolomé de las Casas described about the treatment of the native population by the Spaniards was so detailed and so horrible that the Spanish crown actually started to put in place a lot of laws about the treatment of the native population, which did not give them much in the sense of rights, but at least forbade the enslavement of the native population. In the end, though, Nueva Toledo will end up surviving the test of time. In fact, it is what today we call the city of Cumaná, named after the Cumanagoto people. The same thing cannot be said about Nueva Cadiz, though. Even though in 1529 Nueva Cadiz was incorporated as a city, the really big problems about living in such a harsh environment began to be unsustainable. First, the lack of sources of fresh water, like we have spoken before. Now that Nueva Toledo was a little bit more secure, the water that was consumed in Nueva Cadiz was brought on from the Manzanares River, which meant bringing water over 50 kilometers to the north on boat, having to contour also the coast of the Araya Peninsula. So it was kind of a logistical problem. But second of all, and arguably more importantly, the oyster beds that were feeding and sustaining the economy of Nueva Cadiz basically dried up because of overexploitation. The Waikiki people that were slaved to get those pearls was also dying because of the new illnesses introduced by the Spaniards, as well as the physical abuse. Moreover, to the far west at the Guajira Peninsula, even larger oyster beds were found, so the motivation to stay in Cubagua was not really that strong. Now, if an even bigger and stronger sign was required to totally abandon town, in 1541, a combination of hurricane and an earthquake ended up destroying the whole town. And today, there's nothing but ruins at the Cubagua Island. From that time on, no one ever again has tried to settle that island permanently. Karma is a bitch, I guess. But the legacy of these two cities is very much alive and well today. In fact, Nueva Toledo, which was later on named Cumaná, became the capital of the Nueva Andalusia province. And even before that, the Nueva Cadiz experiment prompted the Spanish crown to decree the creation of the Margarita province in 1515, which is considered the first province, the first organized territory decreed from Madrid that existed in the whole of South America. And from that day on, those islands have always been administered separately from the rest of the continental lands of Venezuela. Today we call them the Nueva Esparta state. But without this wealth of pearls, the focus of the colonization effort actually shifted west, where the first expeditions inland were actually taking place. Curiously enough, not by Spaniards, but Germans. So join me next time when we'll see how that western inland expansion by the Europeans was fueled not only by this desire for adventure, but also by a mythical name that I'm very sure that you know very well. El Dorado. See you then.